My name is Madison, and I'm 28 years old. I still remember the day my parents told me they couldn't afford my college tuition while my sister Brittany sat there smirking. Now, 10 years later, they're standing in my penthouse apartment asking me to pay for her $50,000 wedding. The same parents who bought her a brand new car for her 16th birthday while I took 3 buses to my part-time job. I looked them straight in the eye and laughed. Before I dive into this wild story of family betrayal and ultimate justice, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Are you dealing with similar family dynamics? Hit that like button if you believe in standing up for yourself, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that will leave you speechless. Trust me, what happened next in my living room that day will blow your mind. Let's get into how I went from being the forgotten daughter to holding all the cards in this twisted family game. The spring of my senior year of high school should have been magical. I'd worked my entire life for that acceptance letter from Northwestern University, maintaining a 4.0 GPA while juggling extracurriculars and a weekend job at the local bookstore. When the thick envelope arrived that March afternoon, I thought all my dreams were about to come true. The partial scholarship covered about 60% of tuition, leaving roughly $15,000 per year that I'd need to figure out. I wasn't worried though. My parents had always promised they'd help with college, just like they'd helped their parents' generation believed education was everything. I bounded into the kitchen that evening, acceptance letter in hand, ready to celebrate with my family. My mother was cooking Brittany's favorite meal, as usual, while my 16-year-old sister scrolled through her phone at the counter. My father sat at the table, reviewing what looked like bank statements. The timing felt perfect. I cleared my throat and announced my news, waiting for the eruption of joy and pride that never came. Instead, my parents exchanged a look that made my stomach drop. My mother turned off the stove and came to sit down, her face arranged in what I now recognize as fake sympathy. "Madison, honey, we need to talk about the financial reality here," my father started, pushing his glasses up his nose in that way he did when delivering bad news. "Your mother and I have been reviewing our finances, and with the economy the way it is, we simply can't afford to help with college right now." I felt the room spin slightly. Just last month, they'd renovated the entire kitchen, installing granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. The week before, my mother had shown off her new designer handbag at church, bragging about the great deal she'd gotten at only $800. "But you've always said you'd help," I managed to stammer out, my voice sounding young and confused even to my own ears. "I've worked so hard for this. It's Northwestern, Dad. Do you know how few people get in there?" Brittany snorted from her perch at the counter, not even bothering to look up from her phone. "Maybe you should have applied to state school like a normal person instead of always trying to show off," she muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear but quiet enough that our parents could pretend they hadn't. My mother reached across the table to pat my hand, but I pulled away. "Sweetheart, you're so capable and independent. You've always figured things out on your own. That's what we love about you." Brittany, on the other hand, she glanced fondly at my sister, "She needs more support. She's not as naturally gifted as you are." The word stung more than any slap could have. Not as naturally gifted? Brittany had barely maintained AC average while I tutored other students just to make extra money. Besides, my father added, shuffling his papers, "College isn't really necessary for girls. You could get a nice job at the bank or maybe work your way up in retail. My colleague's daughter started at Target and now she's a manager making decent money. No debt, no stress." I stared at him in disbelief. This was the same man who'd driven me to academic competitions, who'd celebrated when I'd won the state science fair, who'd told me I could be anything I wanted to be. The next morning, I woke up thinking maybe I'd dreamed the whole conversation. Surely my parents, who'd saved for years according to their own accounts, wouldn't abandon me right when I needed them most. I came downstairs to find a brand new BMW in the driveway, wrapped in a giant red bow like something out of a commercial. Brittany squealed as she ran outside, still in her pajamas, while my parents beamed and took photos. "Happy early birthday, princess," my mother gushed. "We wanted to make your sweet 16 extra special." I stood frozen in the doorway, doing rapid mental math. That car had to have cost at least $30,000. Twice what I needed for a year of college. When I pointed this out, my father's face darkened. Don't be selfish, Madison. Your sister's birthday only comes once a year. You can't put a price on making memories. The irony of that statement would haunt me for years to come. Apparently, you could put a price on education, but not on luxury vehicles for teenagers who had failed their driving test twice. Over the next few days, I tried everything. I showed them loan calculations, work-study programs, payment plans. I offered to pay them back with interest after graduation. I even suggested they could co-sign a loan if they didn't want to pay outright. Each conversation ended the same way, with vague excuses about tough times and Brittany needing more help. The breaking point came when I overheard my mother on the phone with her sister, my Aunt Helen. She was laughing about their upcoming vacation to Hawaii, a 2-week stay at a resort that I knew cost thousands per night. That's when I decided to do some investigating of my own. My parents had always been careless with their financial documents, leaving bank statements and investment portfolios scattered around the home office. What I found made me physically sick. They had over $200,000 in various savings and investment accounts. The Hawaii trip was already paid for, first-class flights and all. There were receipts for Brittany's car, plans for her birthday party at the country club, and even a deposit on a shopping trip to New York for her and my mother. I printed everything out, my hands shaking as the papers piled up. When I confronted them with the evidence, they didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. You went through our private documents? My mother asked, as if that was the real crime here. Madison, you violated our trust. How can we help someone who sneaks around behind our backs? The gaslighting was so blatant, so cruel, that I actually laughed. It was bitter and sharp, nothing like my usual laugh. You're really going to stand there and talk about trust? I asked, waving the bank statements. You have more than enough money. You just don't want to spend it on me. My father stood up, his face red with anger. What we do with our money is our business. You're 18 now, Madison. It's time to grow up and stop expecting handouts. Brittany is different. She's delicate, she needs protection. You're tough. You'll figure it out. That night, I called my boyfriend Jake, sobbing so hard I could barely get the words out. He drove over immediately, holding me while I cried in his car outside my house. I couldn't bear to be inside with them. You're going to make it work, he told me, his voice firm and sure. You're the strongest person I know. And I'll help however I can. His faith in me was the only thing that kept me from giving up entirely. I spent the rest of the night applying for every scholarship, grant, and work-study program I could find. By graduation day, I'd secured 3 jobs for the summer, morning shifts at a restaurant, afternoon tutoring sessions, and weekend nights at a call center. My parents attended my high school graduation, but they left early because Brittany had a nail appointment she couldn't miss. I watched them go, my sister trailing behind in designer sunglasses she'd gotten for doing nothing more than existing, and I promised myself that I would succeed without them. Not in spite of them, but because I deserved better than what they were offering. The summer flew by in a blur of exhaustion and determination. I worked 90-hour weeks, saving every penny I could. I sold everything valuable I owned, from the laptop I'd gotten for my 16th birthday to the jewelry my grandmother had left me. My parents watched this happen with detached interest, occasionally commenting that I was being dramatic or stubborn. When they left for Hawaii in August, posting photos of themselves parasailing and drinking cocktails on the beach, I was working a double shift at the restaurant, my feet so swollen I could barely stand. My first year at Northwestern nearly broke me in ways I hadn't anticipated. Beyond the academic rigor, which I'd expected and prepared for, the financial stress created a constant underlying panic that made it hard to breathe sometimes. I lived on 4 hours of sleep most nights, rushing from classes to my campus job at the library, then to my tutoring sessions, and finally to my late-night shift at a 24-hour diner near campus. My roommate, a girl from Connecticut whose parents paid for everything including a monthly shopping allowance, couldn't understand why I was never around for pizza parties or study groups. The physical toll became apparent by October. I'd lost 15 pounds I couldn't afford to lose, surviving mainly on free crackers from the diner and whatever leftover food I could salvage from the restaurant where I worked. Dark circles became permanent fixtures under my eyes, and I developed a persistent cough that wouldn't go away. When I passed out during a chemistry lab, the teaching assistant insisted I go to the health center. The nurse there took one look at me and diagnosed severe exhaustion and malnutrition. She wanted to contact my parents, but I begged her not to, making up a story about them being abroad. Meanwhile, 200 miles away, my sister was living her best life as a high school senior. Her Instagram feed, which I tortured myself by checking during rare breaks, showed a constant stream of shopping hauls, spa days with our mother, and extravagant dinners at restaurants I couldn't even afford to walk past. The captions were always variations of blessed and living my best life, accompanied by heart emojis and tags of designer brands. One particularly painful post showed her complaining about how exhausting it was to choose between 2 prom dresses that each cost more than my semester's textbooks. My grades started slipping in November, not drastically, but enough that my academic advisor called me in for a meeting. Dr. Peterson was a kind woman who'd seen too many students burn out trying to do it all. She looked at my schedule, at the dark circles under my eyes, at the way my hands shook slightly from too much caffeine and not enough food, and her face softened. "Madison, you're trying to do the impossible," she said gently. "Have you talked to your parents about reducing your work hours? Even a small amount of support could make a huge difference." I laughed, but it came out more like a sob. The whole story spilled out then, about the money they had but wouldn't share, about Brittany's car and their vacation, about feeling like I was drowning while they watched from the shore. Dr. Peterson helped me apply for emergency grants and connected me with resources I hadn't known existed. She also became one of my fiercest advocates, writing letters of recommendation that emphasized not just my academic potential but my incredible perseverance. Through her help, I managed to secure additional financial aid for my sophomore year, though it still wasn't enough to quit all my jobs. But it was something, and after months of nothing, something felt like everything. That December, I made the mistake of going home for winter break. I'd convinced myself that maybe distance had given my parents perspective, that seeing me succeeding despite their lack of help might have made them proud. Instead, I walked into a house that had been redecorated extensively, with new furniture and artwork that screamed expensive. Brittany's room had been completely renovated into what looked like a Pinterest dream, complete with a walk-in closet and an en-suite bathroom. My room remained exactly as I'd left it, except they'd been using it for storage. Boxes of Brittany's old clothes and toys were piled on my bed. The family dinner that night was a masterclass in gaslighting and manipulation. When relatives asked about college, my parents jumped in before I could answer, painting a picture of me as an ungrateful daughter who'd refused their reasonable help because I wanted to be independent. According to their version, they'd offered to pay for community college, but I'd insisted on an expensive private school. They made it sound like my working multiple jobs was a choice, a stubborn refusal to accept their guidance rather than a desperate necessity. My Aunt Helen watched me throughout dinner, her eyes narrowing as my parents spun their web of lies. She'd always been different from my mother, quieter but more observant, and she had a way of seeing through family mythology. After dinner, she pulled me aside in the kitchen while everyone else gathered around Brittany, who was showing off yet another new gadget our parents had bought her. "That's not how I heard it," Aunt Helen said quietly, handing me a dish to dry. "Your mother told me months ago that they decided not to pay for your college because you could handle it yourself." Said Brittany needed the resources more. The validation was overwhelming. Someone else saw it. I wasn't crazy. Spring semester brought new challenges when Jake, my boyfriend and emotional anchor, finally reached his breaking point. He'd been patient and supportive, but my schedule meant we barely saw each other. When we did manage to spend time together, I was either exhausted, studying, or stressed about money. The breaking point came when I missed his birthday dinner because I couldn't afford to lose the shift at work. He showed up at the diner at 2 a.m, looking defeated. "I love you, Madison, but you're killing yourself, and I can't watch it anymore," he said, his voice breaking. "You're so focused on proving your parents wrong that you've forgotten to live." I feel like I'm dating a ghost. The breakup gutted me in ways I hadn't expected. Jake had been my safe harbor, the one person who'd believed in me when my own family hadn't. Losing him felt like losing my last connection to normalcy. But in typical fashion, I channeled the pain into work, adding more tutoring clients and picking up extra shifts. My roommate started leaving concerned notes on my desk, suggesting I talk to someone about my workaholic tendencies, but therapy cost money I didn't have, and the free counseling center had a 3-month waiting list. That summer, I didn't go home at all. I stayed on campus, subletting a cheaper room and working 3 jobs while taking summer classes to accelerate my graduation timeline. Every credit hour I could finish early was money saved in the long run. My parents called occasionally, not to check on me but to update me on Brittany's college plans. She'd been accepted to a private fashion institute in New York, with tuition that made Northwestern look affordable. Of course, they were happy to pay for it all, including a Manhattan apartment and a generous monthly allowance. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. They could afford to bankroll Brittany's fashion dreams in one of the most expensive cities in the world, but they couldn't help with my education at all? When I pointed this out during one particularly tense phone call, my mother's response was swift and cruel. "Brittany's education is an investment in her future happiness. She's sensitive and artistic, she needs the right environment to flourish. You're practical, Madison. You don't need fancy things to succeed. That's what makes you special." Special. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. My junior year marked a turning point. I'd finally figured out how to balance everything without completely destroying myself, though the damage to my health and personal relationships was already done. My grades recovered and then soared. I caught the attention of professors who began mentoring me, seeing potential that my parents had dismissed. One professor, Dr. Williams, even offered me a paid research position that allowed me to quit one of my off-campus jobs. It was still exhausting, but for the first time, I could see a future beyond mere survival. Then came Thanksgiving, and with it, another family disaster. I'd reluctantly agreed to come home, mainly because Aunt Helen had personally called and asked me to. What I found was a full family gathering where my parents had apparently been spreading their revisionist history to everyone. Cousins I'd grown up with now looked at me with a mixture of pity and judgment, clearly believing I was the difficult daughter who'd chosen hardship over accepting reasonable help. The final straw came when my grandmother, my father's mother who I'd always been close to, pulled me aside to lecture me about pride coming before a fall and how I should apologize to my parents for being so stubborn. The confrontation that followed was explosive. I stood up during dinner, my hands shaking with rage, and laid out the truth. Every lie, every manipulation, every dollar they'd spent on Brittany while claiming poverty. I had receipts, literally, photos on my phone of their bank statements, of Brittany's car, of their vacation photos. The room went silent except for Brittany's dramatic gasps and my mother's attempts to interrupt. When I finished, I looked around the table at their shocked faces and said, "I'm done pretending this is normal. I'm done being grateful for scraps while watching you lavish everything on someone who's never worked a day in her life." My father's face turned purple with rage. He stood up, pointing at the door. "If you're going to be disrespectful in my house, you can leave." I laughed, actually laughed, because it was so predictable. "Gladly," I said, grabbing my coat. As I walked out, I heard Aunt Helen say loudly, "Well, someone needed to say it." The door slammed behind me, but I felt lighter than I had in years. The truth was out, even if most of the family chose not to believe it. The new year brought fresh chaos when Brittany dropped out of fashion school after only 3 semesters. Her official reason was anxiety and stress, though her Instagram told a different story of constant parties, trips to the Hamptons, and shopping sprees that would have funded my entire education. When the news reached me through the family grapevine, I was in the middle of studying for the GMAT, having decided that business school was my next step toward financial security. The irony wasn't lost on me that while I was plotting my future career moves, my sister was throwing away an opportunity our parents had paid over $100,000 for. According to Aunt Helen, who had become my primary source of family information, Brittany's anxiety manifested primarily when assignments were due or attendance was required. She'd apparently missed more classes than she'd attended, preferring to spend her time networking at fashion events and posting outfit photos on social media. When the school threatened academic probation, she'd called our parents in hysterics, claiming the pressure was too much and that the other students were mean and jealous of her style. Within a week, she was back home, installed in her renovated bedroom, with our parents cooing over her and assuring her she could take all the time she needed to find herself. The family narrative, carefully crafted by my parents, was that Brittany was a sensitive soul who'd been overwhelmed by the competitive New York fashion scene. They painted her as a victim of cruel classmates and demanding professors who didn't understand her artistic vision. Meanwhile, I was graduating summa cum laude while working 2 jobs, but that achievement was apparently less noteworthy than Brittany's failure. When distant relatives congratulated my parents on my academic success, they'd deflect with comments about how grades aren't everything and immediately redirect the conversation to Brittany's courage in prioritizing her mental health. Brittany's next venture was even more absurd. She decided to become a social media influencer, claiming it was a natural fit for her fashion sense and personality. Our parents, enablers to the core, immediately bankrolled this new dream. They hired a professional photographer, bought thousands of dollars in equipment, and even paid for fake followers to boost her numbers. Her content was exactly what you'd expect: vapid posts about coffee, endless outfit changes, and tone-deaf captions about living authentically and choosing happiness. The fact that her happiness was funded entirely by our parents was conveniently never mentioned. I watched this unfold from Chicago, where I'd landed a coveted analyst position at a major investment firm. The job paid well, finally, but I maintained my frugal lifestyle, still haunted by years of financial instability. My apartment was modest, my car was used, and I saved every penny I could. Colleagues assumed I was just naturally thrifty, not realizing I was still recovering from trauma. The contrast between my life and Brittany's couldn't have been starker. While I was working 60-hour weeks and building my career, she was posting daily about the difficulties of content creation and the importance of self-care days that seemed to occur 5 times a week. The influencer phase reached peak absurdity when Brittany started giving financial advice to her followers. A woman who'd never earned a paycheck was posting about investment strategies and building wealth through manifestation. She'd clearly lifted most of the content from actual financial blogs, but her followers ate it up. When I saw a post where she claimed to be self-made and talked about the importance of grinding for your dreams, I actually threw my phone across the room. My roommate at the time, who knew my whole history, poured me a large glass of wine and suggested I block her on all platforms for my own sanity. But Brittany wasn't content to just live her fantasy life online. She started spreading rumors about me within the family and to anyone who would listen. According to her version of events, I was a workaholic who had chosen money over family. She told cousins that I'd become cold and calculating, that my job in finance had turned me into a heartless corporate drone. The narrative was that I judged everyone for not being as successful, that I looked down on family members who chose happiness over wealth. It was a complete inversion of reality, but Brittany had always been good at playing the victim while victimizing others. The Christmas incident that year was particularly revealing. I'd actually made an effort to attend, partly to see Aunt Helen and partly to show that I wasn't the bitter, isolated person Brittany was painting me as. I arrived to find the house decorated like something out of a magazine, with Brittany holding court in the living room, regaling relatives with stories about her influencer journey. When I walked in, conversation stopped. She looked me up and down, taking in my simple black dress and minimal jewelry, and smirked. "Oh, Madison, always so serious. Don't you ever just want to have fun?" The gift exchange was a study in family dysfunction. Brittany received a new MacBook Pro, designer luggage for her travel content, and a check for $10,000 to invest in her brand. I received a $20 gift card to Starbucks and a book about work-life balance that felt more like a passive-aggressive judgment than a present. When Brittany opened my gift to her, a nice but modest scarf, she made a show of examining the label and commenting that she usually only wore designer pieces but would definitely find a use for it. The condescension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Later that evening, I overheard Brittany on the phone with someone, presumably one of her follower friends, talking about how sad it was that I couldn't afford better gifts and how she felt so bad for me being stuck in corporate culture. She went on to say that she was blessed to have parents who supported her dreams, unlike some people who had to slave away for money. The irony of her mocking me for working while she lived off our parents' money was so profound it almost broke through my anger into something like pity. Almost. The new year brought a new development when Brittany started dating Brandon, a successful lawyer from a wealthy family. She'd met him at a charity event she'd attended for content, and he'd apparently been charmed by what he thought was her genuine personality. The relationship moved fast, with Brittany quickly adapting herself to fit into his world. Suddenly, her Instagram was full of posts about charity work, intellectual discussions, and cultural events. She reinvented herself as a serious, philanthropic influence, deleting old posts that didn't fit this new image. What Brandon didn't know was the elaborate web of lies Brittany had constructed about our family. According to her, she came from modest means but had built her influence empire through hard work and determination. I was painted as a jealous older sister who resented her success, someone who'd chosen money over family values. She told his family that I'd been estranged from the family for years due to my difficult personality and inability to be happy for others' success. These lies would eventually come back to haunt her, but at the time, they served to isolate me further from extended family connections. My work life, meanwhile, was thriving. I'd been promoted twice in 3 years, earning recognition for my analytical skills and work ethic. My mentor at the firm, Diana, had taken me under her wing, seeing potential that went beyond my technical abilities. She'd noticed my tendency to work through lunch, to stay late even when it wasn't necessary, and one day she called me into her office for a conversation that changed my perspective. "Madison, you're running from something," she said bluntly. "I recognize it because I did the same thing for years. But you can't outwork your past." Trust me, I tried. Diana shared her own story of family betrayal, of siblings who'd taken advantage, of parents who'd played favorites. She'd also thrown herself into work as a young woman, building an impressive career but losing herself in the process. Her words hit home in a way that years of friends' concerns hadn't. For the first time, I started to consider that my relentless drive might be less about ambition and more about proving something to people who would never see my worth anyway. She recommended a therapist who specialized in family trauma, and after months of resistance, I finally made an appointment. Therapy opened up wounds I'd spent years carefully bandaging with work and willpower. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that my parents' treatment wasn't just unfair, it was emotional abuse. The favoritism, the gaslighting, the way they'd rewritten history to make me the villain, it all formed a pattern of narcissistic abuse that had shaped my entire worldview. I learned about concepts like scapegoating and golden child dynamics, and suddenly my entire childhood made a terrible kind of sense. Every memory I examined revealed new layers of dysfunction I'd normalized in order to survive. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was in the middle of a crucial presentation to senior management. My phone, always on silent during work hours, lit up with notification after notification. Messages from cousins, aunts, even high school acquaintances flooded in. When I finally got a break to check, my stomach dropped. Brittany had announced her engagement to Brandon with a production that would have made a Hollywood publicist proud. Professional photographers, a staged surprise proposal at a vineyard, and a hashtag that was already trending locally, #BrittanyFoundHerBrandon. The Instagram post was a masterpiece of curated perfection. Multiple angles of the proposal, her designer dress strategically chosen to photograph well, the ring, a massive 3-carat diamond that caught the light just right, displayed prominently in every shot. The caption was Vintage Brittany, all flowery language about soulmates and dreams coming true with strategic tags of luxury brands and wedding vendors. What struck me most wasn't the ostentation, though that was certainly on brand, but the complete absence of any mention of family, as if she'd sprung fully formed from the earth without connections or history. The engagement party invitations went out the following week to everyone except me. I found out through Aunt Helen, who called me immediately, her voice tight with indignation. "This is beyond petty," she fumed. "I'm not going if you're not invited. This whole family dynamic has become toxic, and I won't be part of it anymore." While I appreciated her loyalty, I told her to go anyway. Someone needed to be my eyes and ears in that circus, and Aunt Helen had proven herself a reliable ally in the family intelligence network. According to her report, the party was an exercise in excess. Held at the country club where my parents had been members for years, despite claiming poverty when I needed college funds, it featured champagne fountains, a live band, and enough flowers to stock a botanical garden. Brittany held court in a dress that Aunt Helen recognized as costing more than most people's monthly rent, while my parents beamed and wrote checks. The narrative presented to Brandon's family was that they were successful small business owners who'd worked hard to give their daughter the best. The truth, that they were middle management living beyond their means, was carefully hidden. 3 weeks after the engagement party, I received an unexpected call from my mother. Her voice was syrupy sweet, the tone she used when she wanted something. "Madison, darling, we've missed you so much. Your father and I have been thinking, and we realize we've let too much time pass. Family is so important, especially during happy times like these." I stayed silent, having learned that silence often prompted people to reveal more than questions would. Sure enough, she continued, filling the void with nervous chatter about wedding planning and how exciting everything was. Finally, she got to the point. "We'd love to meet for dinner to discuss Brittany's wedding. There are some family matters we need to address, and it wouldn't be right to exclude you from such an important event." Every instinct screamed that this was a trap, but curiosity won out. I agreed to meet them at a restaurant the following week, choosing a public place where they'd be forced to maintain some level of decorum. I also made sure to eat before going, remembering too many family meals where I'd been too upset to swallow a bite. The restaurant they'd chosen was typically ambitious, an upscale steakhouse where they could be seen by the right people. They were already seated when I arrived, my father checking his watch pointedly even though I was exactly on time. My mother's smile was brittle, not quite reaching her eyes, while my father's expression suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. We exchanged stilted pleasantries while ordering, the conversation feeling like a business negotiation rather than a family dinner. Once the waiter left, my mother launched into her prepared speech. "Madison, we know things have been difficult between us, and we take responsibility for our part in that," she began, and I nearly choked on my water. Accountability from my parents was as rare as snowfall in July. However, and there it was, the inevitable qualifier, family needs to come together during celebrations. Brittany's wedding is going to be the event of the year, and it would look odd if her only sister wasn't involved. My father cleared his throat, apparently his cue to deliver the next part. "The fact is, Madison, we've encountered some unexpected expenses with the wedding planning. The venue Brittany has her heart set on requires a substantial deposit, and with Brandon's family having certain expectations, we need to ensure everything is perfect." He pulled out a folder, sliding it across the table like we were closing a business deal. "We're hoping you'll contribute to your sister's special day. After all, family helps family." I opened the folder to find a detailed wedding budget that made my eyes water. The venue alone was $30,000. Flowers were budgeted at $15,000. The dress, already purchased apparently, had cost $20,000. The total came to just over $100,000, with helpful notes indicating which items they expected me to cover. Half. They wanted me to pay $50,000 for a wedding I hadn't even been invited to until they needed money. The audacity was breathtaking. "I'm sorry," I said, closing the folder with deliberate calm. "You want me to pay for half of Brittany's wedding?" The same wedding I wasn't invited to? After you refused to help with my education because you were supposedly broke? My mother's face flushed, but she pressed on. That's all in the past, Madison. We can't change what happened, but we can move forward as a family. Brittany is your only sister. Don't you want her to have the wedding of her dreams? The manipulation was so transparent it was almost insulting. Did they really think I'd forgotten the years of struggle, the nights I'd gone hungry, the opportunities I'd missed because I was working instead of networking? Before I could respond, the restaurant door chimed, and Brittany herself swept in, fashionably late and dramatically dressed. She air-kissed our parents before turning to me with a smile that didn't match the calculation in her eyes. Madison. So good to see you, she gushed, settling into her chair with practiced grace. I'm so glad Mom and Dad talked you into coming. I've been dying to share all the wedding details with you. She launched into a monologue about color schemes and flower arrangements, acting as if we were close sisters who'd simply had a minor disagreement rather than years of her undermining and manipulating family dynamics. The performance was Oscar-worthy, clearly designed for any observers who might report back to Brandon's family. When she finally paused for breath, I set down my fork and looked directly at her. Brittany, why wasn't I invited to your engagement party? The question hung in the air like a challenge. She had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable before recovering. Oh, that was just an oversight. You know how crazy things have been with all the planning. Besides, I wasn't sure you'd want to come, given how busy you always are with work. The lie was so smooth I almost admired it. An oversight, I repeated flatly. Like when you told Brandon's family that I was estranged from the family because of my difficult personality? Her eyes widened slightly, the only sign that I'd hit a nerve. My parents exchanged glances, clearly not aware of this particular fabrication. I don't know what you mean, Brittany said, but her voice had lost some of its confidence. I've only ever told them the truth about our family situation. The truth, I said, leaning back in my chair. Like how you're self-made? Like how you built your influence empire through hard work? Like how our parents are successful business owners? Each question landed like a blow, and I watched her facade crack slightly. My parents looked increasingly uncomfortable, realizing that their golden child had been spinning tales that could unravel at any moment. Those are just misunderstandings, my mother interjected quickly. The important thing is that we're all here now, ready to support Brittany's happiness. Support, I repeated. Interesting choice of words. Tell me, how much support did you give her for the failed fashion degree? The apartment in Manhattan? The influencer equipment? I pulled out my phone, having prepared for this moment. Because according to my calculations, you've spent approximately $300,000 on Brittany's various ventures over the past 5 years. The same years you told me you couldn't afford to help with my education. My father's face darkened. You're keeping track of family finances? That's precisely the kind of behavior that concerns us, Madison. This obsession with money isn't healthy. The gaslighting was immediate and predictable. I was the problem for remembering, not them for the inequity. You're right, I said, standing up. It's not healthy. Which is why I won't be contributing a penny to this wedding. Brittany, I wish you and Brandon all the best. I hope he never finds out who you really are. As I turned to leave, Brittany grabbed my arm. You're just jealous, she hissed, dropping all pretense. You've always been jealous that Mom and Dad love me more. That's why you're trying to ruin my wedding. I looked down at her manicured hand on my arm, then back at her face. I'm not ruining anything, Brittany. You're doing a fine job of that yourself. Lies have a way of surfacing, especially when you're joining a family of lawyers. I shook off her grip and walked out, leaving them with the check. The family bombardment began less than 12 hours after the restaurant confrontation. My phone rang at 6 in the morning with a call from my grandmother, my mother's mother, who I hadn't spoken to in over a year. Her voice was tearful and shaky as she launched into a prepared speech about family unity and forgiveness. Madison, sweetheart, I don't have many years left, she began, a manipulation tactic I recognized immediately. She'd been claiming to be on death's door for the past decade whenever she wanted something. I just want to see my granddaughters happy and united before I go. Is that too much for an old woman to ask? By noon, I'd received calls from 6 different relatives, each with their own version of why I was destroying the family. My uncle Robert, who I'd barely spoken to since childhood, lectured me about family values and supporting one another. My cousin Sarah, who'd borrowed money from me during college and never paid it back, sent a long text about how disappointed she was in my selfishness. The irony of these people, who'd been absent during my struggles, suddenly caring about family unity was not lost on me. Each had clearly been fed a different story by my parents and Brittany, creating a confusing narrative where I was simultaneously a millionaire hoarding wealth and a bitter failure jealous of my sister's success. The most painful call came from my Aunt Helen, though hers was different from the rest. Madison, I'm calling to warn you, she said without preamble. Your parents are telling everyone you're worth millions. They're claiming you make 7 figures at your job and have trust funds you're hiding. I tried to correct them, but they're convinced you're lying about your finances. I sank onto my couch, exhausted by the delusion. I made good money, yes, but I was far from wealthy. Years of aggressive saving had built me a solid emergency fund, about $150,000, but that was my entire safety net in case I ever faced financial instability again. The lies became more elaborate as the week progressed. According to various family members who reached out, I was apparently a secret cryptocurrency millionaire, a trust fund baby who'd hidden inheritance from the family, or a corporate executive making millions in bonuses. One particularly creative version had me married to a wealthy businessman who funded my lifestyle. The fact that I lived in a modest apartment and drove a 5-year-old Honda Civic was conveniently ignored in these fantasies. When I tried to correct the record, I was accused of being secretive and deceptive about my success. Brittany's contribution to the campaign was particularly vicious. She started showing up at my workplace, creating scenes that threatened my professional reputation. The first time, she convinced security she was there for a legitimate meeting, then cornered me in the lobby during lunch. You're ruining my life, she shrieked, loud enough for colleagues and clients to hear. Brandon's family is asking questions about why my own sister won't support our wedding. Do you know how that makes me look? I tried to walk away, but she followed, her voice growing louder and more hysterical with each step. Security eventually intervened, but the damage was done. Word spread through the office about my dramatic family situation, and I noticed colleagues giving me curious looks. My manager pulled me aside to ask if everything was okay, clearly concerned about the potential impact on client relationships. I assured her it was under control, but when Brittany showed up again 2 days later, this time with our mother in tow, I knew I had to take more serious action. They were escorted out before reaching my floor, but not before causing another scene in the building's lobby. The weekend brought a new level of harassment when my parents began showing up at my regular locations. Saturday morning, I walked into my gym to find them waiting by the reception desk. We just want to talk, my mother said loudly, ensuring everyone around could hear. Is it so wrong for parents to want to see their daughter? I tried to ignore them, heading for the locker room, but they followed, my father lecturing about family responsibility while my mother dabbed at manufactured tears. The gym staff, uncomfortable with the drama, asked us all to leave. Later that day, they ambushed me at the grocery store, appearing in the cereal aisle like retail stalkers. This time, my father's approach was more aggressive. You ungrateful child, he hissed, backing me against the shelving. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? By humiliating your sister and destroying our family's reputation? I laughed, which only enraged him further. Everything you've done for me? Name one thing. One single thing you've done to help me since I turned 18. The confrontation escalated when my mother suddenly clutched her chest, gasping and claiming she couldn't breathe. Panicked shoppers called 911, and soon the store was swarming with paramedics. I knew immediately it was a performance, having seen this manipulation before, but I played along to avoid further drama. At the hospital, after numerous tests showed absolutely nothing wrong, a perceptive doctor pulled me aside. "This isn't the first time I've seen this particular type of anxiety attack," he said carefully. "Family dynamics can be complicated, but using medical emergencies as emotional manipulation is a serious concern." The social media assault began that night. Brittany, apparently deciding that in-person harassment wasn't enough, took to Instagram and Facebook with a carefully crafted victim narrative. She posted old family photos with captions about missing her sister and hoping for reconciliation, each post tagged with enough hashtags to ensure maximum visibility. Her followers, mostly bots and a handful of real people who didn't know better, flooded the comments with support and condemnation of the toxic sister who was breaking Brittany's heart. The peak of her online campaign came when she posted what she claimed was my net worth, complete with fabricated bank statements showing millions in various accounts. Where she'd gotten the templates to create such convincing forgeries, I didn't know, but the posts went mini-viral in our extended social circle. "I just wanted to show people that I'm not asking for much," her caption read. "My sister has more than enough to help family, but she chooses greed over love. Some people forget where they came from." The comments were brutal, calling me heartless, selfish, and worse. The professional implications became serious when someone forwarded Brittany's posts to my company's HR department. I was called in for a meeting where I had to explain the situation, provide actual financial documentation to prove the posts were fabricated, and assure them that this wouldn't impact my work performance. While my manager and HR were understanding, even sympathetic given the evidence of harassment, I was mortified. My carefully maintained professional reputation was being tarnished by my family's greed and delusion. That evening, exhausted and demoralized, I called Diana for advice. She listened to the whole saga without interruption, then sighed deeply. "Madison, this is beyond normal family drama. This is coordinated harassment, possibly rising to the level of stalking and defamation. You need legal protection." She recommended a lawyer who specialized in family law and restraining orders, someone who'd helped another colleague with a similar situation. I'd resisted taking legal action, still somehow hoping my family would come to their senses, but I realized Diana was right. This wasn't going to stop on its own. The lawyer, Janet Morrison, was a no-nonsense woman who'd clearly seen every type of family dysfunction imaginable. She reviewed the evidence I'd collected. The harassing calls and texts, the workplace incidents, the social media defamation, the attempted manipulation through false medical emergencies. "This is textbook harassment," she said, shaking her head. "The fact that they're your family doesn't give them the right to stalk you, defame you, or interfere with your livelihood. We need to act quickly before this escalates further." We drafted cease and desist letters for my parents and Brittany, outlining the harassment and demanding it stop immediately. Janet also advised me to document everything, keep all communications, and consider security measures for my home and workplace. The letters were sent via certified mail, ensuring they couldn't claim ignorance. I also had to make the difficult decision to pursue a restraining order if the behavior continued, something that felt like a final severing of family ties I'd once hoped to maintain. The cease and desist letters arrived on a Monday, and by Tuesday morning, my family had gone nuclear. My phone exploded with calls and texts from every relative in our extended family tree. The narrative they'd been fed was that I was trying to sue my parents and sister for loving me too much and wanting to include me in family celebrations. My mother had apparently called everyone in tears, claiming I was trying to destroy the family and ruin Brittany's wedding out of pure spite. The victim narrative was so well crafted that even relatives who'd previously been sympathetic started questioning my actions. Wednesday brought an unexpected development when my apartment building's doorman called my cell while I was at work. "Ms. Madison, I thought you should know your family is here claiming there's an emergency. They're quite insistent about being let up to your apartment." My blood ran cold. I'd specifically not given them my new address when I'd moved 6 months earlier, maintaining a P.O. box for any necessary family communication. Somehow, they'd found me anyway. I thanked him for following protocol and immediately called building security to ensure they wouldn't be allowed access under any circumstances. By the time I got home that evening, prepared for confrontation, they were gone. But they'd left their mark. My door was covered in printed emails and text messages, selectively edited to make me look cruel and ungrateful. Photos of Brittany crying were taped alongside screenshots of my harsh responses to their requests. A handwritten note from my mother claimed I was breaking her heart and destroying our family. The melodrama was exhausting, but what concerned me more was how they'd gotten past the building's security to reach my floor. A review of security footage showed they'd convinced an elderly resident they were surprising me for my birthday, a lie that got them through the main door. Thursday's escalation was more serious. I was in a client meeting when my assistant knocked urgently, her face pale. "Madison, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation. Your sister is in the lobby with several other people, and they're making quite a scene. Security is holding them, but they're threatening to call the media if you don't come down." My clients, two executives from a major corporation, looked uncomfortable. I excused myself professionally, but the damage to my reputation was accumulating with each incident. In the lobby, I found Brittany surrounded by a small group of her influencer friends, all filming with their phones. She'd dressed for the occasion in what looked like funeral attire, complete with a black veil, as if mourning the loss of our sisterhood. The performance was aimed entirely at social media, with Brittany sobbing dramatically about family bonds and forgiveness. "I just want my sister back," she wailed to the cameras. "I don't understand why she hates me so much. All I wanted was for her to share in my happiness." Security looked relieved when I appeared, clearly out of their depth with the theatrical display. I didn't engage, simply standing back while security informed them they needed to leave or police would be called. Brittany's sobs grew louder as her friends continued filming, but when she realized I wouldn't take the bait, her tactics shifted. "Fine," she screamed, throwing off the veil. "But when our parents die from the stress you're causing, their blood is on your hands. You're destroying this family because you're jealous and bitter and alone." The accusations echoed through the marble lobby as security escorted them out, phones still recording everything for their social media narratives. That evening, the videos hit Instagram and TikTok with carefully edited captions about toxic siblings and family estrangement. Brittany's followers, now numbering in the tens of thousands thanks to the drama, overwhelmed my social media accounts with hateful messages. Death threats, suggestions I kill myself, graphic descriptions of what they hoped would happen to me, all because I wouldn't fund a wedding. I spent hours screenshotting everything for legal documentation before finally deactivating all my social media accounts. The isolation was preferable to the avalanche of hate. Friday morning brought the most serious violation yet. I arrived at work to find my desk drawers opened and papers scattered. Nothing seemed missing at first, but then I realized my personal planning notebook was gone, the one where I kept financial goals and investment notes. Security footage revealed that someone matching Brittany's description had talked their way past the night security, claiming to be delivering urgent family medical documents. She'd spent 20 minutes at my desk, photographing everything she could find before taking the notebook. The violation of my personal space, my workplace sanctuary, felt like a physical assault. Within hours, selective photos of my financial documents appeared online. Brittany had photographed pages showing my investment account balances, twisting them to support her narrative of my secret wealth. A modest retirement account became evidence of hidden millions. My emergency fund was proof I'd been lying about my financial situation. Stock options from my company were presented as evidence of executive-level wealth. The narrative was that I had millions while letting my family struggle, complete with manufactured tears about how she just wanted a simple wedding and couldn't understand my cruelty. My company's legal department got involved at this point, as the security breach was serious enough to warrant potential criminal charges. They reviewed the footage, interviewed the night security guard who'd been deceived, and prepared a formal complaint. My manager, despite being supportive throughout this ordeal, had to have a difficult conversation with me about the impact on the firm. While they didn't blame me for my family's actions, the constant disruptions and security concerns were becoming a liability. I was placed on temporary administrative leave while they figured out how to handle the situation. The weekend brought a surprising ally in Brandon, Brittany's fiancé, who reached out through LinkedIn with a request to talk. We met at a discreet coffee shop, where he looked haggard and confused. "I need to understand what's really happening," he said without preamble. "The woman I proposed to and the person I'm seeing now seem like two different people. My family is starting to ask questions I can't answer." I could have been petty, could have destroyed him with the truth all at once, but I saw genuine pain in his eyes. This wasn't his fault. I laid out the history calmly and factually, showing him documentation of my parents' financial favoritism, the harassment campaign, the lies Brittany had told about our family. His face went through a journey of emotions: disbelief, recognition, anger, and finally a sort of defeated understanding. "She told me you were estranged because you were jealous of her success," he said quietly. "Said you'd always been difficult, that your parents tried their best but you pushed them away." "None of that was true, was it?" I shook my head, feeling unexpected sympathy for this man who'd been caught in my family's web of dysfunction. Brandon revealed his own discoveries, things that hadn't added up but he'd dismissed as pre-wedding stress. Money missing from joint accounts Brittany claimed went to wedding planning but couldn't account for. Lies about her background that his family's casual investigation had started to uncover. The influencer career that was hemorrhaging money despite her claims of success. "She's been using our wedding as leverage to get money from everyone," he said, pulling out his phone to show me messages. "Your parents, my parents, aunts, uncles, even my business partners. Everyone's been asked to contribute to various wedding expenses that seem to keep growing." The conversation took an unexpected turn when Brandon asked if I'd be willing to speak with his parents. They'd hired a private investigator after some of Brittany's stories hadn't checked out, and what they'd found concerned them. I agreed, realizing that Brittany's house of cards was finally starting to collapse. The meeting with Brandon's parents was illuminating. They were kind, intelligent people who'd been completely taken in by Brittany's performance. The investigator's report revealed not just lies but potentially criminal behavior, forged documents, fraudulent charity claims, and a pattern of deception that suggested serious personality disorders. Monday morning arrived with a police visit to my apartment. My parents had filed a complaint claiming I'd stolen family heirlooms and money from them over the years. The accusations were so outlandish that the detective, a woman who'd clearly seen every type of family dispute, could barely hide her skepticism. I provided years of bank records, tax returns, and employment history, demonstrating that every penny I had was earned through my own work. The detective took my statement and the evidence of harassment I'd compiled, suggesting that the false police report might actually work in my favor for the restraining order. As the investigation progressed, more truth emerged. The detective discovered that my parents had been telling different stories to different people, creating a web of contradictions. They'd claimed to some relatives that I'd stolen $50,000, to others it was $100,000, and to the police, it was family heirlooms valued at over $200,000. When pressed for specifics about these heirlooms, they couldn't provide descriptions, photos, or insurance documentation. The detective warned them about filing false reports, but the damage to their credibility was already done. The unraveling began with a single thread that, when pulled, destroyed the entire fabric of lies my family had woven. Brandon's family's private investigator had been thorough, uncovering not just Brittany's deceptions but a pattern of financial manipulation that went back years. The report, which Brandon shared with me in a conference room at his law firm, was devastating in its detail. Brittany had been running various small-scale scams for years, always targeting people who wouldn't press charges: elderly relatives, family friends, romantic partners who were too embarrassed to admit they'd been fooled. The most shocking revelation concerned our grandfather's estate. I'd always been told he'd died with little to his name, his modest pension barely covering final expenses. The truth was staggeringly different. Grandfather had left a considerable estate, with specific provisions for his grandchildren's education. $200,000 had been set aside, explicitly divided between Brittany and me for college expenses. The investigator had found court documents showing our parents had accessed these funds as trustees, draining my portion over the years while carefully preserving Brittany's for her use. Brandon looked sick as he reviewed the documents with me. "This is fraud," he said quietly. "Criminal fraud. They had a fiduciary duty as trustees and they violated it. You could have them arrested." I stared at the papers, seeing my grandfather's careful handwriting on the will, his hope that his grandchildren would have the education he'd never been able to afford. The betrayal wasn't just from my parents anymore. They'd stolen not just money but my grandfather's final gift to me, his investment in my future. The investigation had also revealed the depth of my parents' financial irresponsibility. They'd remortgaged their house 3 times, each time to cover Brittany's failed ventures or lavish spending. Credit cards were maxed out, loans had been taken against retirement accounts, and they were months behind on basic bills. Yet somehow, there was always money for Brittany's desires. The pattern was clear. They'd sacrificed their own financial security and my future to feed an endless appetite for indulgence that had created a monster. Brandon ended the engagement that evening, returning to Brittany's apartment to collect his belongings and end the relationship. According to his later account, she cycled through every manipulation tactic in her arsenal. First came tears and promises to change. When that didn't work, she threatened suicide, holding a bottle of pills dramatically while demanding he stay. When he called 911, she suddenly recovered, switching to rage and threats. She'd destroy his career, she promised, tell everyone he'd abused her, claim he'd stolen from her. The fact that she'd documented none of their relationship on her supposedly authentic social media was suddenly useful. There was no evidence to support any claims she might make. The aftermath of the breakup was swift and vicious. Brittany immediately took to social media, crafting a narrative where Brandon was an abusive narcissist who'd tried to control and manipulate her. She claimed he'd isolated her from family, which was particularly ironic given the restraining orders in progress. Her followers rallied around her, flooding Brandon's firm's social media with accusations and demands for his termination. His family's response was measured but devastating. A single press release stating they had documentation of fraud and harassment that would be turned over to authorities. My parents, faced with the collapse of Brittany's engagement and the exposure of their financial crimes, made one last desperate attempt at damage control. They showed up at Aunt Helen's house, knowing I sometimes visited her, hoping to ambush me there. But Aunt Helen, fed up with years of enabling, refused to let them in. The confrontation on her doorstep was loud enough for neighbors to call the police, and when officers arrived, they found my parents violating the restraining order I'd finally obtained. They were arrested, spending a night in jail before being released on bail. The family fracture was complete when relatives finally learned the truth. Aunt Helen, armed with documents from both the private investigator and my own evidence, held a family meeting I didn't attend. She laid out the entire history. The stolen inheritance, the lies about my financial status, the harassment campaign, everything. The relatives who'd been calling me selfish and cruel were faced with evidence of systematic abuse and theft spanning years. Some refused to believe it, clinging to the narrative they'd been fed, but others were horrified at being manipulated into participating in the harassment. My grandmother, the one who'd called me crying about family unity, was particularly devastated to learn about the stolen inheritance from her late husband. She'd been told the money had gone to medical bills and funeral expenses, never knowing it had been designated for education. Her anger was quiet but profound, the kind that comes from realizing you've been fooled by your own child. She cut off financial support she'd been providing to my parents, money they'd claimed was for basic necessities but was clearly funding Brittany's lifestyle. The legal machinery ground slowly but inevitably forward. The district attorney, presented with evidence of fraud, theft, and harassment, decided to pursue charges. My parents were formally charged with breach of fiduciary duty and embezzlement related to the inheritance theft. Brittany faced charges for the office break-in and theft of personal documents. The irony that they'd finally face consequences not for emotional abuse but for financial crimes wasn't lost on me. The system rarely prosecutes for destroyed childhoods, but it does care about stolen money. During this period, I returned to work after my administrative leave was resolved. My company, impressed by how I'd handled the situation and sympathetic to the harassment I'd endured, not only welcomed me back but offered additional security measures. The experience had actually enhanced my reputation in an unexpected way. Colleagues saw me as someone who could handle extreme pressure with grace and professionalism. Diana joked darkly that surviving my family was better preparation for corporate politics than any MBA program. The court proceedings were a surreal experience. Sitting in a courtroom, watching my parents being questioned about their financial decisions, felt like an out-of-body experience. They tried to maintain their victim narrative, claiming I'd manipulated the system against them, but bank records don't lie. Transaction after transaction showed money meant for my education diverted to Brittany's shopping sprees, vacations, and failed business ventures. My father's attempt to claim it was family money that they had discretion to distribute fell apart when the prosecutor presented the will's explicit language. Brittany's testimony was a masterclass in deflection and denial. She claimed to know nothing about the inheritance, insisting our parents had told her the money came from their hard work and savings. When presented with evidence that she'd been present at meetings with financial advisors where the trust was discussed, she claimed not to remember. Her social media posts celebrating expensive purchases immediately after trust withdrawals were dismissed as coincidences. The judge's expression throughout her testimony suggested he'd seen this type of performance before and wasn't impressed. The verdict was guilty on all counts. My parents were sentenced to probation and ordered to pay restitution, though the chances of recovering the full amount were slim given their financial situation. Brittany received community service and probation for the office break-in, a lighter sentence than she deserved but more than she'd ever faced before. The real punishment came from the social consequences. Brandon's family made sure the truth was widely known in their social circles, effectively blacklisting my family from the society they'd tried so hard to impress. The financial recovery was partial but significant. The court ordered restitution of $75,000 plus interest and damages, to be paid from my parents' remaining assets. They were forced to sell their house, the one they'd remortgaged repeatedly for Brittany, moving into a small apartment. The irony that they'd ended up in the kind of modest housing they'd always claimed was beneath them wasn't lost on anyone. Brittany had to move back in with them, her influencer lifestyle no longer sustainable without their financial support. The months following the trial brought unexpected peace to my life, even as my family's world crumbled around them. I threw myself back into work with renewed focus, but this time it came from ambition rather than desperation. The promotion to senior analyst came with recognition that my handling of personal crisis while maintaining professional excellence was exactly the kind of leadership the firm valued. My new office had a view of the lake, and sometimes I'd stand at the window, marveling at how far I'd come from the exhausted college student surviving on ramen and determination. Brittany's fall from grace was as dramatic as everything else in her life. Without my parents' money or Brandon's connections, her influencer career imploded spectacularly. Brands distanced themselves when the fraud charges became public, and her follower count plummeted as people realized her lifestyle had been built on lies and theft. She attempted several comeback narratives, each more desperate than the last. First, she was a victim of family dysfunction learning to stand on her own. Then she pivoted to being a reformed scammer sharing cautionary tales. When those failed to gain traction, she tried positioning herself as a mental health advocate, claiming all her behavior stemmed from undiagnosed conditions. The desperation reached new heights when she started a GoFundMe claiming she was homeless and struggling, conveniently omitting that she was living with our parents and simply couldn't afford her previous lifestyle. When that was exposed by commenters who knew the truth, she pivoted again, this time selling a course on social media influence that was essentially repackaged free information from YouTube. The few people who bought it demanded refunds when they realized it was worthless, leading to more public drama that further damaged her already tattered reputation. My parents, stripped of their house and savings, were forced to confront the reality they'd created. My father, who'd spent years in middle management while pretending to be a successful executive, found himself unable to retire as planned. The pension he'd borrowed against barely covered their rent, and he had to take a part-time job at a hardware store. My mother, who'd never worked during their marriage, found employment as a receptionist at a dental office. The same people who'd told me college wasn't necessary for girls now depended on the very kinds of jobs they'd once dismissed as beneath our family. Their attempts to rebuild family relationships were predictably self-serving. They reached out to relatives with sob stories about being persecuted and abandoned, but the well had been poisoned by their own actions. The relatives who'd initially believed their lies had seen the court documents and evidence of fraud. Even those who might have been sympathetic were put off by the continued refusal to take responsibility. Every conversation somehow circled back to how they were victims, how I'd destroyed the family, how unfair life had been to them. 6 months after the trial, I received a letter from Brittany through my lawyer. It was 12 pages of rambling self-pity mixed with veiled threats and demands. She alternated between apologizing and blaming me, sometimes within the same paragraph. The most telling part was her admission that she'd always known about the inheritance but felt she deserved it more because I was too independent and would figure things out anyway. She ended with a request for a loan to help her start over, promising to pay me back once her new business venture succeeded. I had the letter added to my legal file and didn't respond. The intervention attempt came on a Thursday evening. I arrived home to find my building's common area occupied by my parents, Brittany, and a woman who introduced herself as a family therapist. They'd apparently convinced building management this was a scheduled meeting, another lie in their endless stream of deceptions. The therapist, Dr. Patricia Wendell, seemed genuinely surprised when I informed her I hadn't agreed to any session and asked security to remove everyone except her. Something in my calm demeanor made her pause and request a private word. In my apartment, Dr. Wendell's professional facade cracked as I showed her the legal documents, the restraining orders, the evidence of financial fraud and years of abuse. Her expression shifted from skepticism to horror as she realized she'd been manipulated into participating in continued harassment. "I've been practicing for 20 years, she said quietly, and I've never seen gaslighting this systematic." They presented themselves as concerned parents trying to save a daughter from mental illness. "Every behavior they attributed to you, it's actually what they're doing." Classic projection. She offered to provide a statement for my legal file about their attempt to weaponize therapy against me, which I accepted. Before leaving, she made an observation that stayed with me: the fact that you're functional, let alone successful, after this level of psychological abuse is remarkable. Many people would have internalized their narrative. Your ability to maintain reality in the face of their distortion shows exceptional psychological strength. It was the first time a professional had validated not just the abuse but my survival of it. The confrontation that followed Dr. Wendell's departure was ugly. My parents and Brittany, realizing their ambush had failed, resorted to screaming through my door until neighbors called the police. They were arrested again for violating restraining orders, and this time the judge was less lenient. My parents received 30 days in jail and extended restraining orders. Brittany got 60 days and a stern warning that next time would mean prison. The mugshots made local news, a final humiliation for people who'd spent so much energy maintaining false appearances. The time they spent incarcerated gave me space to process everything with my therapist. We worked through the complex emotions. Grief for the family I'd never had, anger at years of manipulation, but also a strange gratitude. Their treatment had forged me into someone strong and self-reliant. Every obstacle they'd thrown in my path had become a stepping stone to greater resilience. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that while I couldn't change the past, I could choose how it shaped my future. I didn't have to carry their dysfunction forward. When they were released, there was one final attempt at contact through a mutual acquaintance. They wanted to meet at a neutral location to clear the air and start fresh. The message came with promises of changed behavior and acknowledgement of past mistakes, though notably no specific admissions of wrongdoing. I crafted a response that was firm but not cruel. I forgave them for my own peace of mind, but forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation. They'd broken something that couldn't be repaired, and I wished them well in their lives separate from mine. The scholarship fund started as an idea during therapy, a way to transform pain into purpose. I named it after Aunt Helen, the one family member who'd consistently seen truth and stood by it, even when it cost her relationships with others in the family. The Helen Morrison Education Fund would provide full tuition support for students whose families couldn't or wouldn't support their education. The first year, I funded it with the restitution money from the lawsuit, a poetic justice that money stolen from my education would now enable others' dreams. The application process was designed to catch students like I had been, those caught between potential and circumstance. Beyond financial need, we looked for signs of resilience, kids who were already fighting to succeed despite obstacles. The essay question asked them to describe a time they'd overcome adversity, and reading those first applications brought me to tears. So many stories of young people betrayed by those who should have protected them, yet still believing in the power of education to change their lives. I saw myself in every one of them. The inaugural scholarship ceremony was held at a local community center, deliberately modest because the money should go to students, not fancy events. 5 recipients, each with their own story of perseverance, sat in the front row with mixture of pride and disbelief on their faces. As I stood to speak, I noticed movement in the back of the room. Aunt Helen had arrived, bringing with her several family members who'd finally understood the truth. Their presence felt like a validation I hadn't known I needed. My speech was brief but honest. I told them about taking 3 buses to get to work, about fainting from exhaustion in chemistry lab, about choosing between textbooks and food. But more importantly, I told them about the professor who'd believed in me, the counselor who'd found emergency funds, the strength that comes from knowing you've earned every single achievement. Your worth, I said, looking at each young face, is not determined by who does or doesn't support you. It's not measured by what others think you deserve. Your worth is inherent, and your dreams are valid, even if you're the only one who believes in them right now. After the ceremony, each recipient wanted to talk, to share more of their story, to thank me for understanding. Maria was escaping a family that wanted her to work in their restaurant instead of studying engineering. James's parents had disowned him for being gay and refused to provide financial information for federal aid. Keisha's mother spent every dollar on addiction while telling relatives Keisha was selfish for wanting college. David's father believed education was wasted on a son with dyslexia. Sarah's family had money but gave it all to her brother while telling her girls didn't need degrees. Each story was unique but bound by common threads of betrayal and determination. The fund grew quickly as word spread. Local businesses wanted to contribute, inspired by the mission of supporting overlooked potential. Other survivors of family educational neglect reached out, some with money to donate, others with expertise to offer. We created a mentorship program pairing recipients with professionals who'd overcome similar obstacles. The network became more than financial support, it was proof that chosen family could fill the gaps biological family had left. My personal life, long neglected in the pursuit of financial security, began to flourish. At a charity event for educational access, I met Thomas Chen, a software engineer who'd also put himself through school without family support. Our first conversation lasted 4 hours, comparing notes on creative ramen recipes and the particular exhaustion of working night shifts while maintaining Dean's List grades. He understood without explanation why I always needed to know I could support myself, why independence wasn't just important but essential to feeling safe. Our relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and shared understanding. Thomas had his own family trauma, parents who'd wanted him to be a doctor and withdrawn support when he chose computer science. He'd succeeded despite them, building a career he loved and maintaining boundaries that protected his peace. Together, we navigated the complexities of intimacy when your first lessons about love came wrapped in conditions and manipulation. We learned to trust incrementally, celebrating each small victory over inherited dysfunction. The wedding was deliberately small, an antithesis to the lavish production Brittany had dreamed of. We married in Aunt Helen's backyard with 20 guests who truly mattered. My scholarship recipients sent a group video message that made me cry. Former colleagues who'd witnessed my family's harassment came to celebrate my joy. The family members who'd eventually seen the truth stood witness to a union built on mutual respect rather than transaction. Thomas's best friend officiated, speaking about love that empowers rather than diminishes. Aunt Helen walked me down the aisle, a role she'd earned through years of being the family I'd needed. In her toast, she said something that resonated. Madison took the worst thing that happened to her and transformed it into the best thing that could happen to others. That's not just resilience, it's alchemy. She turned pain into purpose, betrayal into blessing for students who needed someone to believe in them. That's the legacy worth celebrating. The reception was joyful without ostentation, proof that meaningful celebration doesn't require excessive spending. The final chapter of my family story came unexpectedly 2 years later. A message through my lawyer informed me that my father had suffered a heart attack. He was recovering but facing significant medical bills their insurance wouldn't cover. My mother, through the lawyer, wasn't asking for money but wanted me to know in case I wanted to visit. I sat with the information for days, discussing it with Thomas and Dr. Martinez. The decision came down to what would give me peace, not what anyone else thought I should do. I didn't visit, but I did something else. I arranged for a one-time payment to the hospital to clear their bill, submitted anonymously through a medical debt relief charity. It wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation, but acknowledgement that holding on to active hatred was poisoning me more than them. They'd never know the help came from me, which felt appropriate. True charity expects neither recognition nor reciprocation. It was my final act in our relationship, closing that chapter with neither bitterness nor false hope for reconciliation. Brittany attempted contact one more time, through a cousin she'd maintained relationship with. She was working retail, living in a studio apartment, and had apparently developed some humility through hardship. The message was simple: she was sorry, genuinely this time, and wanted nothing except to apologize. I considered meeting her but ultimately declined. Some bridges, once burned, serve their purpose better as ash. The cousin reported back that Brittany had expected that answer and said she understood. Growth, perhaps, but too late for restoration. My life now is full in ways I couldn't have imagined during those desperate college years. Thomas and I have a daughter, Lily, who will never wonder if education is worth investing in. The scholarship fund has grown into a full nonprofit, supporting dozens of students each year. I speak regularly at colleges about overcoming family financial abuse, always ending with the same message: you are not responsible for the family you're born into, but you are responsible for the life you build despite them. Your dreams matter, your education matters, you matter, regardless of who does or doesn't see your worth. Sometimes I think about my college self, that exhausted girl surviving on determination and instant noodles, working 3 jobs while her sister posted shopping hauls. I wish I could tell her it would be worth it, that the struggle would forge strength she'd need for battles she couldn't yet imagine. That the family who abandoned her in pursuit of education would one day beg for the success that education brought. That she'd find real family in mentors and friends, build a life of purpose from the rubble of dysfunction, and transform her greatest wound into her greatest gift to others. The truth is, I succeeded not because of my family but despite them. Every obstacle they placed became a stepping stone. Every lie they told clarified my truth. Every dollar they denied taught me to create my own security. They gave me the greatest gift through their neglect, the absolute certainty that I could survive anything, overcome any challenge, build any future I envisioned. I am Madison Chen now, 35 years old, and I know with bone-deep certainty that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's living well, giving generously, and breaking cycles of dysfunction with deliberate grace. The scholarship recipients often ask how I moved past the anger, how I found peace with such profound betrayal. I tell them healing isn't linear and forgiveness isn't mandatory. You can release people without reconciling, find peace without forgetting, build joy without their participation. The family that raised you is just your starting point, not your destination. Where you go from there, who you become, what you build, that's entirely up to you. And sometimes, the family you choose and create is worth infinitely more than the one biology assigned. My name is Madison. I was abandoned by those who should have supported me, and that abandonment became the foundation of my strength. May you find the same transformation of pain into power. What about you? Have you ever had to choose between family expectations and your own dreams? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit the like button and share it with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone in their struggle. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you don't miss more stories of triumph over family dysfunction. Remember, your worth isn't determined by who supports you but by who you choose to become. Thank you for sharing this journey with me, and may you find the courage to write your own story of success, whatever that looks like for you.